but you don't know if it's going to be any good. In fact, I don't know if it's going to be any good. And thank you, Neil, of all the introductions I've had. That was by far the most recent, so thank you so much. And I was true, Neil and I have known each other for a decade, but I just want to acknowledge both Neil and Erwin Rode for putting on this event. Erwin, I think you've been in this game for some 27 years, put on events throughout South Africa for 23 years. Is that something? You know you're doing something right when you're doing it that long. And Neil, of course, is a prolific creator of magazines, and not just here in South Africa, but in other countries as well. And prolific writer, so it's a real honor to be here. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the very last time I was in Durban, I was in the same room. Is that about right? It is. And I see a number of familiar faces. Justin, I think you were sitting almost in the same spot last time. And that pillar, no one's moved that pillar yet. So I'll try and move around so we all get to see each other, although you might like that the pillar's between us. Feel free to continue eating. I don't know if I'm entertainment while you're eating or while the food is something to sustain you, if the words don't. But either way, it's all good. I was asked to speak on global trends in real estate. And, you know, for the last 3 decades that I've been in this game, there wouldn't have been much to say, and I can explain that a little bit. I've always been kind of proud of the fact that in the real estate game, nothing changes much. Now, to give that some perspective, Neil's right, I did a PhD, and not in the easiest topic. It was in electrical engineering, which some of you know is quite a difficult course. It was 7 days a week, 11 hours a day. And it took 8 years, you know, from start to finish to get a PhD in electrical engineering. And yet everything I learned, everything has been made redundant by new technology. We learned the operating characteristics of valves, and most of you without grey hair will think valves must be taps or faucets. But I'm talking about valve radio style valves, which were replaced by transistors, which were replaced by integrated circuits. And then VLSI, very large scale integrated circuits. And then ASICs, application specific integrated circuits. It all has changed and become outdated. And yet when you consider property, nothing has changed. Collateral is still collateral, equity is still equity. If you don't know the difference between equity and collateral, then you better learn it or you'll fall on your face somewhere. But there are only about a dozen words you need to learn. You can learn 80% of what you need to know to be an extraordinarily successful real estate investor in about a week. The remaining 20% takes a bit longer. It's the subtle nuances. But I've always stood by that claim. It doesn't change much. All it takes is insight. So what we used to focus on is what can you do to change the value of a building in a way that other people couldn't see. So I'll give you an example. We'll cut to the chase. We were in Jakarta and we turned $20 into $2 million overnight. Does anyone want to know how we did that? 3 of you, not enough to bore the audience. I respond. So come and see me afterwards and I'll move on to. By the way, I noticed when Scott asked for those who did something and then those that didn't, only about 10% of you voted. You know, and that makes me think, why are you not voting? But anyway. So $20 into $2 million. Jakarta has a nighttime population of about 5 million people and a daytime population of 10 million. What does that tell you? Every morning, 5 million people commute into town, and every evening, 5 million commute out. Has anyone been to Jakarta? Is it busy? Horrendously busy. It is so busy that you can take an hour to go a kilometer. So most cars have plastic contraptions in them, forgive me for relating this, but if you need to go to the restroom, to put it euphemistically, you can use one of these contraptions. There's an L version, and you might say, well, that's ridiculous. If you take an hour to go a kilometer, just get out of the car and walk. The exercise is good for you anyway, right? What's the problem with that? 2 million other Indonesians are walking too, and you're going down the sidewalk, and they're squeezing between the people. So how does that affect us? Well, if you've got a commercial building downtown, the drive to the airport with no traffic is about 40 minutes. But during the day, if you need to get to the airport, it might take 2 hours, it may take 5 hours. You see the challenge now. So we had a building, it was about, it wasn't feet for some reason, but it was 100,000 square feet. And it had a flat roof. So we spent the $20 on a pail of paint and a brush, and we painted a big white circle on the roof, and then the letter H. And we created what's known as a helipad, all right? So we had a helipad on the roof. Now you could fly by helicopter from this building to the airport in 10 to 15 minutes. And rentals, which were going at $14 a foot, went up to $16 a foot. All right, so $2 a foot per $2 per foot rental extra over 100,000 square feet is $200,000 a year extra. And when you cap that out at 10%, you've created $2 million from $20. You're starting to get this picture. You know, okay, I know we needed to get Civil Aviation Authority approval. It's Indonesia. That takes a few dinners and all that sort of thing. That's true. So I always used to say there are so many things you can do to massively increase the value of real estate without spending much money. And I'm always one who tends to put my money where my mouth is. I wrote a book on it. It's the longest title on Amazon, 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. I think there are copies outside me, I think. So Neil's got some of these books available. And was it easy to come up with 101 ways? No, folks, it was tough. It was tough to limit it to 101 because there are so many more. And after a while, you get a mindset to say, okay, what can I do to this property to increase its value? And it becomes a sport. It's like a game. But the rules didn't change. So, you know, I went to Vegas once and I managed to buy a house using no cash, and it was cash flow positive. And I was pretty excited, so I went back to Phoenix. It's only 37 minutes by air from Phoenix to Vegas. It's about 400 kilometers, so, you know, 4 or 5 hour drive, depending on the speed you're going at. And they said, what did you do? I said, just bought a house. No money and cash positive. And they said, you can't do that. Now, I don't know how you react when you share something you've done and people say you can't do that. I mean, are they saying, you outright liar? I thought, what do you mean? If I'd said I just had lunch on the moon, I'd forgive you for saying that, although I prefer the, well, how did you do that? So I thought, I'll show them. I'll buy one house a week for an entire year. I set out to do that. It was 2003, it's 8 years ago now. But it was just when Gulf War II was coming away. In the first 3 months, I managed to acquire 2 homes. And I thought, I wish I had made this announcement so boldly, because I'm way behind schedule. But momentum picked up, and towards the end of the year, I was buying 3 and 4 houses a day, with none of my own cash, all cash flow positive. In fact, I turned that into a book. Here it is, 52 homes in 52 weeks, complete with photos of the homes, how we did it, where we did it, the addresses, everything. And you know what people said? You can't do that. You must have gotten those homes because of you. Some agent probably sold you a house at 10% of its value, just to be able to say they sold a house to you. By the way, if you're an agent, you want to do that? Come and see me. Don't wait for the break, see me now. But it's never happened. But the point is this, I wrote all these books on how to do real estate. Stable, the same, doesn't change. And talking about global, I mean, Neil's right. Did you say 3 laps around the world? Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've done 3 laps around the world. In the last 6 months, I've done 111. It's an obscene number. I travel way too much. But it gives you a perspective on what's happening in real estate that I really wrote. So my books have been translated into Greek. I know it's Greek to you, but it's kind of fun. This is Bahasa. Where is Bahasa spoken? Oh my gosh, you guys don't get out enough. It is the most populous nation in the southern hemisphere, the most populous Muslim nation on this planet. They have more oil than any other country in the southern hemisphere. It's Bahasa.
Malaysia.
Indonesia, yes, I already gave it away. 228 million people, as well as they can estimate. And here's the funny thing, we all think in terms of doing business in other parts of the world, and whether you're in the United States or Europe, or people think of doing stuff in Australia. Do you know that there are more dollar millionaires in Indonesia than there are people in Australia? And by the way, if you do it in Bahasa, it covers Malaysia as well, so that's sort of a bonus. And then as a kid, I was blessed, I learned Japanese, so I've got audio courses in Japanese, and books in Japanese and all that. And the point is just to share that it's different all over the world, but these real estate principles are consistent. So when people ask me, what are the changes? I say, well, that's the beauty of it. There's no change. If you're an engineer, you have to belong to memberships and read magazines and keep up to date with the latest trends, otherwise you fall off the... But with real estate, you can buy a piece of property and put the title in the bottom drawer and go on a 6-month cruise and not worry about it. Well, there are crashes every now and then. So when I was asked on global trends, I was excited. Do you know why? Because for the first time in my short relative to the history of time, career in real estate, there is a major trend coming. There is a major shift happening that is unlike anything I've ever seen. And to understand it fully, I want to take you on a bit of a guided imagery tour back into the past, because I can see some of you are delightfully young and you're blessed because you probably grew up with cell phones and don't even imagine a world without them. And others of you, like me, are a bit grey. I used to dye my hair grey to look more distinguished because I was too young to have credibility on stage, but I don't need to do that anymore. So some of you are like that. And some of you, I can tell, we can't tell the colour of your hair, but we won't go into that. And so there's been this massive shift. But when I think back to when I started in real estate, there were no cell phones, right? No cell phones. That means you went back to the office and your secretary would say, oh, you've had calls from these 8 people. Which ones do you want to take now? Or call back or whatever. And when cell phones came out, you'll all remember the big Motorola brick. And I remember the day that they came up with their first flip phone. $5,995. Yeah, that is 60,000 rand. And $1.87 a minute, incoming or outgoing. But I've always been a maverick. I've always been the think different kind. I remember thinking, okay, these things are ridiculously expensive, but if I buy one and I'm now mobile, I can take a call in my car. I just need to do one real estate deal, and the profit from that one deal could pay for my cell phone usage for the rest of my life. So I did. I got the phone, I paid the ridiculous charge per minute. By the way, it wasn't, you know, per 6-second block or something, it was per minute or part thereof. So if you call someone with the wrong number, oh man, $1.87. Then they'd call you back and say, what did you want to talk to me about? That was $3.70 something, Jared. So I did that, and it paid for my cell phone use forevermore. But what I didn't realize is that the cost was coming down. It was just sharing at the table. We were talking about cell phones. I've got my cell phone from the States here. You'll cringe at this. I pay $40 US a month for, in the States, unlimited calling. They don't check minutes. I don't know how many minutes I use. Unlimited texting and unlimited internet. But get this, when I travel, my calls are 20 cents a minute, incoming or outgoing. My texts are free. So to text any one of you now doesn't cost me a cent, incoming or outgoing. And I have unlimited internet. That would, of course, be good, but here in South Africa, it's not much. It's pretty slow. If I weren't in real estate, I'd get into the internet business, because anyone who can crack how to get internet spread out here must do really well. So this phone came along and it changed the world, and we just use it to call numbers. When they had feature phones, we had last number called and last number received for the last 20, that became even more useful. But even back then, I had no idea how useful these things would become. Remember when GPSs came out and it knew where you were, and you could punch in an address and it would guide you there? Well, we thought that was pretty hot. But now GPSs are all incorporated in here, and they have other features. Like the companies that run them have servers that monitor not only where everyone is, but how fast they're moving. So to see how fast traffic is moving on the N2, they just look at the 30 people who have their GPS on the N2, and they're all going at 38 kilometers an hour. That means it's moderately congested. And they can put that back onto your phone. Do you see the power of this? And then we got apps like Facebook and Twitter. Well, I'm on Facebook because of the machine. I don't do it personally. And we maxed out at 5,000 friends, and I thought, good, then I don't need to do any more to that. But now they want me to convert it to you probably know better than I do, a fan page or something like that. So I'm not into Twitter. I'm not into saying, I feel like a coffee. Oh, the line's rather long. It's oh, man, it was worth the wait. You know. I think, so what? But I missed the boat, folks. I can say 2 words, and you might start to think of what I'm alluding to. Arab Spring. The Arab Spring happened and was possible and was totally facilitated by smartphones and Facebook and Twitter and all those other social media apps. Because if you wanted to have a printing press that said there'll be a protest march in such and such a square, the perpetrators and the printers and their families would have been shot long before you could disseminate them. But you put it out on Facebook, and within 3 seconds it's on 2 million smartphones. That's the power of this stuff. Right? So the world has changed, and you might as well get back to the point. This is the point, folks. These things are transforming the way we do everything. All right? So In the past, if you had a technological idea and you wanted to bring it to the market, you'd have to raise capital. Say you wanted a modest $500,000, right, 5 million rand. You would go to either an angel financier or a venture capitalist. This is gel with anyone, that's how you do it. And they'd put up the $500,000, but in return, they'd want 80% of the equity in your company. So now you're working for them, but hey, your idea gets out and you make a little bit. And then we had websites. You may have heard of Kickstarter.com or Indiegogo, where you put a little video of your idea on the website and a description, and you can raise small amounts. It might be 20,000 or 5,000. Some of these sites are willing to accept lumps as low as $100 or $50 or $10. So if you get 1,000 people putting up $500, that's the same 500,000. But now you haven't had to give up 80% of your company. Not only did this work, it took off through social media. What's in it for the investor? Who would put up $100? Well, you might get one of the first prototypes of whatever it is they're proposing to make. Or you might get to choose your color, or you get it 4 months before anyone else, and it feels good, you're helping them, and it's not going to some big corporate. So they found these things were being oversubscribed by a factor of 2 or 5 or 50. They're after $500,000 and they get $38 million. So two things happen. One is anyone with an idea realized this was the way to go, so they all flocked to these sites. And number two, investors realized that, okay, they don't have $500,000 to buy one idea, but they can put 1,000 in this and 10,000 in that. They can have a spread and be in touch with what's going on. But thirdly, and most significantly for all of us in this room, government stopped and looked at what was happening. And they said, holy smoke, this is a model that inadvertently we've been stifling. Now, how can I say that? I have a theory, I discuss it in this book, Real Estate Riches, I've got a whole chapter on it, where every government law tends to have the inverse effect of that intended. I'll give you an example. Governments sometimes say, it is unfair that these unscrupulous, racketeering, fat-bellied landlords should see fit to jack up rents to whatever they see fit and line their own pockets at the expense of the poor, kind, sweet, benevolent tenant. So we're going to put in a law that we're going to limit rental increases to the CPI, to the Consumer Price Index. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Sounds fair, sounds socially responsible. Why should landlords be able to double the rent if the CPI has only gone up by 3%? So everyone agrees, and everyone thinks they're going to live happily ever after. But then something happens. For some reason, that I'm happy to explore with you if you want, but for some reason, rents in a certain city might go up by, or not rents, capital values, go up by 20 or 30%. All right, Silicon Valley is a perfect case. There are so many people wanting to move there to catch wind of the technological revolution that prices have gone up faster than the national CPI. Right, so values have gone up by 20%. Normally rents would go up by that amount to reflect that, but they're now tied to the 1.8% CPI. So rents are tied, values have gone up, that means returns have gone down. That means investors don't want to get into the market because the returns are too low. And people who are already investors can't increase it. They sell to buy somewhere else. And they don't sell to other investors. Investors don't want it, so they sell to own occupants. So there's now a shortage of rental accommodation, which means rents would have gone up even more to counter that, but they can't. And suddenly you've got a situation that's spun out of control. The two cities in the United States that have the highest rents and the biggest black markets in terms of under-the-table transactions, are San Francisco and New York. The same two cities that have rent control. So government rules have the inverse effect of that intended. So the government has said, we've got a lot of scam artists raising capital, so we're going to have a whole set of rules around how you may or may not raise capital. And we'll give a body the power to punish and all this, and it's called the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. In Australia, it's the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. Is it SEC here in South Africa? No one knows. It's good if you don't know, because that means you haven't had to deal much with them. And they've got good intent, don't get me wrong, and I'm not just saying that in case one of you is surreptitious, they've got good intent. But what they say is, for any investor to go ahead, you're limited to this number of investors. Typically in many countries it's 25, sometimes it's 50. They have to be accredited, they have to show annual income in US dollar terms of $200,000 a year and net worth of $1 million. And if it's a couple, it's $1.5 million and $300,000. All these different rules to protect the individual from being scammed by scammers, which is a good intent. But the inadvertent ancillary effect of that is that we've stifled the ability for people to invest. So not too long ago, some countries started opening up the concept of crowdfunding. What we talked about before, where you've got Kickstarter soliciting maybe $50 or $100 for a technological gadget, that's crowdfunding. You now don't necessarily know who the investors are. You're not going to friends and family. You're not mailing it out to your existing database of people you know. By the way, that was one of the SEC rules. You could only solicit funds from people you had an established relationship with. So if you got up on stage, if I were to do that now and say, listen, I've got this property, it's just outside of Durban here, we're trying to raise, 30 million rand, whatever, this is the equity, this is the debt. I am not allowed to do that because according to them, the SEC, I have no established relationship with you and there are more than 25 of you, or whatever their rules are. And so I'd be in dire violation of one of their harsh rules. Does this gel? Have you conformed to this with all your PPMs and prospectuses and all that? So now they're saying, oh my gosh, this is the way of the future. We are going to allow this. We're going to have a new set of rules. So around the world, governments have been scrambling to adapt the rules to suit the new reality. And America wasn't even the first. America was late in the act, about 10th in line, or 11th. There were 10 ahead of them. And it came through the Jobs Act. It's actually a misnomer. It sounds as though it's an employment act or piece of legislation to encourage employment. But Jobs is an acronym. I forget what it's for at the moment. Oh, I thought Justin was going to tell us, but he was just...
Just over broke.
What's that? Yes.
Just over broke, is it?
Okay, it's just over broke. That's why you have a job, yeah. But whatever the reason, they have now changed legislation to encourage it. So Scott and I went to Singapore in July to speak at a conference there on crowdfunding for real estate. And it was partially sponsored by the government. That government knows that that's the way of the future, and they're encouraging people to do this. So everyone's turning on to it. In the last 12 months, there have been more than 1,000 portals set up to enable crowdfunding of real estate. All right, the stats are phenomenal in terms of, $96 billion is expected to be the size of the industry within a very few short years. Which is already, what is it, Scott, 1.5 times the value of all venture capitalist funding that's going on. And it's not because real estate is better, we think it is, but it's just because it's the biggest market. When you look at the real estate industry and the capital values tied up in the rentals and the value of the properties and the land, it's greater than the next 3 biggest industries combined. So it's just mere dint of the fact that we're dealing in real estate. But as true as I stand here, and for the last 30 years, I've said, well, there's no real change. Learn what equity is, learn what collateral is, and you'll do really well in real estate. Now it's changing. You'll still do well. I think property values will still chug along. By the way, the biggest indicator as whether property is going to go up or down is what? What's the benchmark? What determines whether properties will go up or down? Is it the color schemes they use? What's fashionable for color? Income? Growth? Growth of what? Growth of the area? Population growth. You said that? Someone over here said, yes. It's population growth, folks. That determines growth of everything, growth of incomes and everything else, but it's population. There is almost a one-on-one correlation between population growth and capital value growth. Right? It's so uncanny, I don't understand it. So I hear lots of people, in the stock market, for instance. I know there might be stock marketeers here and more power to you, and I want to acknowledge you for doing that, and I fully acknowledge that Warren Buffett has made more money in a day than I will in 5 lifetimes, and probably all of us in this room combined in 5 lifetimes. So I'm not saying that property is absolutely better than the stock market, but I do have this contention, and I'll state it quite boldly. If you take 1,000 people at random and give them to Warren Buffett or George Soros or anyone else and get them to teach all they know in the stock market and track their results over 10 years, and give me another batch of 1,000 people similarly chosen at random and let me spend a weekend with them and teach them what I think I know on real estate, it's my contention that my 1,000 on average will do better than the other 1,000. Not because I'm a better teacher, folks, far from it. Because real estate lends itself better to making money for its proponents than other things do. Because the stock market works a lot on averages. And averages are a tricky thing. You know, people don't understand averages. As Neil said, I was born in New Zealand. There's a lot of rivalry between New Zealand and Australia. The truth is, when we meet each other in Europe, we're the best of buddies. But down under, we're big rivals. So I always point out the fact that in New Zealand, half the population's of above average intelligence, whereas in Australia, half the population's of below average intelligence. And it's true. And they don't like that. And when they don't like that, so you're kind of proving the point with your disapproval. They complain that a lot of Kiwis come to Australia and live on the dole. And I say, yeah, that's true. And did you know that every time a Kiwi does migrate to Australia, it increases the average IQ of both countries? That's pretty neat. But it's true. In South Africa, half the population is of below average intelligence because the other half is above average intelligence. That's how you get an average. So in the stock market, everyone tries to beat the average. And guess what? Half of them do, and the other half don't. And it's how you choose it. So I'm always amused when you see an ad in the paper for, you know, some mutual fund manager or stock manager. We've beaten the average for the last 4 years. You know what I hear or what I read? 5 years ago, we didn't beat the average. Because if they had, folks, they would have said we've beat it for the last 5 years. Right? And then how statistically significant is it? And I've always asked my stock marketeering aficionado friends, what's your strategy for beating the average? And they said, well, it depends. You've got to watch the market every day. You know, don't you have to watch real estate every day? I said, no. It's buy and forget, basically. What's your strategy? What do you buy? Technology stocks? Well, that worked. I said, yeah, it didn't work in 2000, did it? No, yeah. And they said, well, what's your strategy in real estate? Folks, I have 18 strategies for beating the average. Consistently, regularly, in any country, in any economy, rising or falling. Who would be willing to pay $10,000 to find out how to beat the average consistently? Anyone? Just a few of you, not worth a while. But if there are only 4 of you who'd be willing to pay money to find out how to do that, then is it not true that if I told you now anyway, it would be wasted on you because you're not even willing to buy it? Why should I give it to you for nothing? True? How badly do you want it? So 4 of you see me afterwards and we'll share. It's pretty easy. Look, everything has an average. So in South Africa, you've got an average increase of real estate value. Does anyone know what it is? I know in the States it's 9.7%. That's average. That includes horrible little towns where there used to be steel mills and they've gone out of business, so 80% of the town is unemployed. Those properties aren't going up fast. Let me explain what's happening in Detroit for you. In Detroit, the city council was declared bankrupt. And then they said it went against the law to declare bankruptcy as a city. I mean, they're in dire straits. They're taking pieces of downtown Detroit, 4 blocks by 4 blocks, so 16 blocks in all, and they fence them off and they turn off the street lights and the water and the sewerage and the power to save money. Detroit is growing at above or below the national average. What do you think? Below, it is. If Detroit's growing at below the national average, does that mean that there are other places that are growing above? Absolutely. Lots of them. So just by picking the right city, you can beat the average. Phoenix has been growing at above average growth rates for 50 straight years. It's not like the stock market, well, for 50 minutes the stock is trending up, let's buy something and monitor it, because they're like, that's 50 years. Las Vegas, the same. In fact, Phoenix and Las Vegas have a growth rate that is more than 50% higher than the 3rd fastest city. That means if you buy in either of those 2 cities, chances are, all other things being equal, you're going to beat the national average. Now within those, within Phoenix, do you think there are suburbs that grow at faster than the city average? Yes. It takes about half an hour to find out which ones. I'll tell you in case you think it's secret. Paradise Valley is the place to be. Minimum lot size of 1 acre, no telegraph poles or cell phone towers. It's a bit like South Africa in that regard, not good internet, but it visually looks beautiful, right? And so do you think within Paradise Valley there are clusters of streets that grow at a faster rate than other clusters of streets? Yes, they have a better view, they're shielded from the wind or goodness knows what. So that's one where you pick the right geography. Right, do you want to know another one? The same 4 people Do you not want to know another one? Just blank. Look, has the food upset your stomach? Are you still trying to figure out what a GPS is? I lost you there. Come on, folks. Listen, life, you get out of life what you put into it. And I'm telling you, the more you interact, Scott said it, the more you interact, the more you get out of it. Not just here, I don't care whether you interact or not, but when you leave this room. The most common comment I get from people who run these fancy events, I won't go into it, where we don't teach any specific topic of real estate, but we take people to the next level. The most common comment we get is, listen, I'm smart, I'm diligent, I work hard, I'm honest, I have integrity, I'm kind, I'm a good family person, and somehow I feel that my circumstances don't reflect who I am. Well, if not, you've got to figure out, what are you giving the world? You've got to interact. All right, so another example of how you can beat the average. And when I say this, well, we knew that. But did you really? Because if I asked you, what's another example, what would you say? All right, not much. So, we all know that populations are getting older in the Western world, not in the young world. In Asia, more than half the population below 30, in Africa too, probably. But in the Western world, France, Germany, the United States, Japan in particular, the proportion of elderly is going up exponentially, which means the number of people in the workforce who have to pay for the retirement packages of the elderly is getting out of whack. So you might say, well, that's a real problem, let's immigrate and go, and live in Asia or something. Or you might say, that means the demand for services related to the elderly must be going up exponentially. So do you think there's an increasing or decreasing demand for rest homes, assisted living facilities, retirement complexes, all those things related to the huge increase. So if you invest in those as opposed to kindergartens, chances are you're going to do better than average. Here's another one. Let's say you have a piece of land, it'll be easy to imagine here, by the sea. Do you think it will go up in value faster than something that is 5 kilometers from the sea, or a lake or a river? Does that work here in Durban? Is it played out here? In Australia, they have all these gradations of how close to the sea you are. If you've got beachfront property, that doesn't mean you front onto the beach. No, the word for fronting onto the beach is absolute beachfront. Beachfront, no, it's true. Beachfront means you can see the beach. So you've got absolute beachfront, beach walking, beach biking, beach driving, beach holiday. That means you live there as well. And you keep going, beach driving, beach biking, beach hiking, beach view, beachfront, absolute beachfront. It works that way, folks. The closer you are to the sea or a lake or a river, the faster it goes up in value. It's just a given. It hasn't changed anywhere in the world. So, these are 3 of the 18, and I just gave them to you in what's the word, one at a time. But can you imagine the power of combining these? Right? The combinational effect. So I lived in La Jolla for a while. La Jolla is a suburb of San Diego. Apparently, it's one of the top 12 suburbs in the United States. And it's well known for many things, but one of them is it's got a seal colony there, a natural seal. They just swim out of the ocean and come and bathe there. Well, if you walk up from the seal colony, across the road there is a retirement home in the suburb of La Jolla with a view out over the ocean. So I'm asking you, if you were to invest in that retirement home, do you think it would grow at above or below the national average? Above, folks. It's so easy, and that's my point. It's so easy to beat the average in real estate in a manner that, according to me, it's so difficult to do in any other field. Because real estate is slow to change. Now, it does change. Houses are taking on this automation. We always used to think, who would want a fridge that monitors your milk consumption, and when it's low, it orders another bottle to be delivered by this internet delivery service to your home? But it's happening. All right, we're all interconnected. So it's a trend that I don't think we can get away from, folks. Any questions so far on this? None at all? Well, so that brings us to why we might have a crowdsourced real estate company, crowd-funded real estate company out of South Africa. Let me give you a little perspective on that. I was born in New Zealand by birthright. I have a New Zealand passport. Dutch law says anyone born out of a Dutch wedding is Dutch no matter where they're born, so I have a Dutch passport. So now I can live in Australia, New Zealand, the Norfolk Islands, Chatham Islands, Auckland Islands, all that sort of thing, or anywhere in the 27 member nations of the EU, And obviously I have resident status in the States to live there. So I can live just about anywhere I choose. And for now, I choose to live in the States. For all the challenges we might face there, there are many, many advantages. But I'm blown away at how insular that nation is. I'll give you an example. Only 17% of the population has a passport. It's astoundingly low. Fewer than 5% leave the country in any given year. How can they do stuff internationally? By the way, that's part of the challenge and reason why they have such a terrible balance of payments deficit. They don't do international trade. I'll give an example. There are about 100 million companies in the States, fewer than 1% export. Of those who do, 80% export either to Canada or Mexico, which means it's not even overseas. They think Hawaii is overseas. Right? So only 200,000 companies export overseas. And yet any time a company exports overseas, they benefit everyone because it brings dollars in, which raises the value of the dollar. Compare that with the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is a big national sporting event. I forget the sport. Anyway, it's Super Bowl. Last February, it was watched by 114 million people, none of whom had a vested interest in the outcome. 114 million people watch a game for pure hedonism, and 200,000 export to benefit everyone. All right, so that gives you an insight. So America doesn't do business overseas in general. I know there are exceptions, folks. I know Microsoft is sold all over the world. I know Boeing aircraft fly all over the world. I know that. But on average, the proportion of Americans who think globally is minuscule. So if you ask them to do crowdfunding, they would have a site in Singapore and South Africa, and everything would be in one currency, and they'd all be in square feet and miles and fluid ounces and all this nonsense instead of getting with it. You know they're the only country left that hasn't gone metric. France went metric with the revolution in 1769. Holland, 1820. Our poor neighbors to the south, being Mexico, 1840. Those silly Canadians up north, 1973. America probably won't do it. Can you believe it? It's sort of, so for them to have a portal that goes global, I think it's not good. So one of the great things about Wealth Migrate is we have experience that covers just about every country. I don't think we're in Antarctica yet, although it'd be fun to do a deal there just to include. But I don't think anyone does. Isn't it protected through world treaties or something? I don't think it's possible to buy it. But our combined experience, and Scott will go into that. And you know, we've got hundreds of years of experience in this game. We've done tens of thousands of transactions. So we're poised to go global, and we understand the challenges of going global. One of the biggest challenges if you want to invest in the States is how to get set up there. What do you use as an entity? By the way, the worst entity you can use here in South Africa or anywhere in the world to buy real estate is what? Actually, the second worst is to buy it in your own name. Would you agree? Or is this news to some? Okay. Never buy in your own name. There's only one thing worse, and that's to buy as joint tenants in common. Because then you're jointly and severally responsible for each other's stupidity. So that's even worse, you know, so you've got to set up entities. And entities vary. In the States, they use an LLC a lot, which is a limited liability company. But in essence, it's just a flow-through device that flows it through to a person. It's not an autonomous thing. So if you've got 100 LLCs all doing different things, they don't even pay tax. Right? They have it flow through to you, and you end up paying the tax. So it's just a very interesting phenomenon. So you've got to decide, do you want an LLC or do you want a real company, which is in the States it's called an incorporated company, and then you've got to know, is it a C Corp or an S Corp, and they have pros and cons, and what about you as a foreign investor? So there's a whole learning curve to go through, but is it worthwhile? Well, South Africa is probably the country which has the most receptive audience to the concept of doing something outside of South Africa. America, I think, has got an equally big need because, you know, it's unsure what's going to happen there, but they don't think in terms of other things. You know, the standard thing is you're in Paris and you hear two Americans go up to an unsuspecting French person and say, could you tell me where's the Champs-Élysées? And the Frenchman genuinely didn't understand, so he says, pardon, monsieur? The American thinks the only inhibitor to being understood was a matter of volume. Whereas the Champs-Élysées, well now the Frenchman thinks he's being attacked, he scurries away. And the American says to everybody, these French don't even speak English. As if they should. And that's how it sort of escalates. Okay? So it's just cultural. It's neither good nor bad, folks. As I said, an American in the audience, if you see, recording of that, I live there by choice. There's, I often get asked, what's the best country in the world? I tell you what, if you want to eat boiled wash, you better come here because it's pretty damn good. In fact, the food here is, look at that breakfast. Was that a good breakfast? I think it was. The fruit here is just delicious. It's a taste explosion in your tongue. In the States, I was saying to Erwin before, the fruit is bigger and brighter and shinier and glossier. And it tastes like nothing. Because it's been genetically engineered to look shiny and glossy and big and juicy. And forget about the taste. You see where I'm coming from? So one of my favorite sayings is, charms strike the sight, but merit wins the soul. You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter how you word it or what you do. At the end of the day, it's what have you done. So if you just walk away with one fact from this, forget the helipad on the roof, although you can do that, you'd be stunned how often you can do that, folks. I write about it in that 101 Ways book. And by the way, Neil, you've got books out the back, right? So we used to make these books available because I used to do great deals, like the 50 times. This is how I did it. You can too. Buy the book and replicate it. And now you don't need to replicate it because now you can come to Wealth Migrate and other crowdsourced funding real estate platforms and participate and use other people's knowledge. But you can still figure out what's being done because you never learn less, folks. You never learn less. Right? And if you don't have time to read, may I make a very humble suggestion? Take your television set and toss it out the window. If you want to save some money, I'm all for that. Open the window first, I don't care, but get rid of the TV because we all waste far too much time. Have to catch up on the news, right? What has it served you to have watched the news 3 years, 2 months, and 1 day? Zero, zilch, nothing. But when you read a good book, there's no limit to what that might be worth to you. It could be worth 10,000 a month to you. So read. So those books are available, even if it's not to do what's in those books, is to find out what we at Wealth Migrate and other places are doing. What's more, and Scott will probably get into this, when you do commit to making an investment with us, depending on the level, we'll give you a pack of these because we want you to know what's going on. This is my favorite book, by the way, of all the ones I've written, How to Do Commercial Deals. I make a claim in here, once you get a taste for commercial, you will never even want to look at a residential property again. Is that a bold claim? Yeah, it is, because you just, who would be bothered with it? And I go into all the details here, but there are many of them. When you're a residential landlord, you might collect the rent, but who pays the property taxes, rates, insurance, maintenance? The landlord does. When you're a commercial landlord, the tenant pays it all. Plus, they earn their income there. They have a vested interest in making it look good. Right? We visited, if I may say, I didn't ask permission, but we visited private property. I don't know if it's called that or .co.za, but anyway. Offices there are spectacular. It's worth going there just to see the offices. But do you get the impression that, wow, this is obviously a rental property and they don't give two hoots about punching holes in the walls? No, it was a delight to see. I mean, it's a real thrill. So and that's just two. There are many, many reasons why commercial is good. Anyway, you get access to all of these things when you join us because we want you to know what's going on. It's such an exciting field. And I suspect many of you are excited, but if I took a snapshot of you right now, you would not think you were excited. Well, there are a few exceptions. It's true. There are about half a dozen exceptions. Some of you are thinking, what the heck was that all about? Folks, if there's nothing else you take away, remember this. There's a wave coming. You're going to participate or not, it doesn't matter. The world will continue. The sun will rise the next day. But within 5 years, you're going to look back and say, I knew that this crowdsourced funding of real estate was coming. And you had the opportunity right at the very beginning to participate in it with Wealth Migrate. I always say there are 3 kinds of people. There are those who make things happen. There are those who watch things happen. And there are those who wonder what happened. And you're in a unique position now to make sure you're one of those that actually make things happen. And not that you just watch. So I know this is going to be a bit of pill for you to swallow. Because I'm sort of encouraging you to be a bit more enthusiastic. How do you think I feel dancing and standing and waving up here? And I'm being very subdued I put on my Durban persona right now. But I promise you, to the extent that you get a bit involved mentally and psychologically, even, it's going to change your lives. Try it for a week. Not right now, because if you do it straight after I finish talking, you just did that because you said so. But try starting from lunchtime or something. Your lives will change. Thank you very much. You've been a great crowd.